Chapter 1. The Ghost of Tambora. The world did not end with a whimper, but with a roar that was heard 1,600 miles away. In April 1815, on the remote island of Sumbawa in the Dutch East Indies, Mount Tambora didn't just erupt, it disintegrated. It was the most powerful volcanic event in recorded human history, 10 times more powerful than Krakatoa. It ejected 160 cubic kilometers of debris into the atmosphere. To the locals, it was the wrath of the gods. To the rest of the world, it was a silent, invisible killer drifting across the oceans on the back of the stratospheric winds. By early 1816, a thick, sulfurous veil of aerosol particles had wrapped itself around the globe like a funeral shroud. This dry fog didn't wash away with the rain. It dimmed the sun, turned the moon blood red, and began to plummet the global temperature. In the United States, the young nation was still catching its breath after the War of 1812. James Madison was in the White House. The frontiers were expanding. People were optimistic. They had no idea that a geological ghost from the other side of the planet was about to bring the American dream to its knees. Chapter 2. The Frost of June. The Great Mistake began in May. In the rolling hills of Vermont and New Hampshire, May was usually the season of rebirth. But in 1816, the buds on the apple trees didn't bloom. They shriveled. The ground remained as hard as iron. Then came June 6th. Imagine being a farmer in 1816. You have survived wars and British blockades. Your entire life's work is in the soil. You go to bed on a humid evening, and you wake up to a world turned white. Not a light dusting, but a killing frost. In Albany, New York, and Dennisville, Maine, the snow didn't just fall, it drifted. History records that people began to call it 1800 and froze to death. In the taverns of Boston, men whispered that the sun was growing old, or that God had turned his face away. The scientific community was baffled. Benjamin Franklin had once theorized that volcanic dust could cool the earth, but his notes were forgotten in the panic. As the frost killed the corn, the staple of the American diet, the price of grain skyrocketed. A bushel of corn that cost 50 cents in 1815 was suddenly $3. For a poor family in the Appalachian foothills, that was the difference between a meal and a slow death. Chapter 3. The Hunger and the Hegira. The summer of 1816 wasn't just cold, it was chaotic. Every time the sun seemed to gain strength, another cold wave would strike. In July and August, ice formed on the edges of ponds as far south as Virginia. This is where the real history of America changed forever. Before 1816, the West, which back then meant Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, was seen as a dangerous wild frontier. Most families stayed in the established colonies of New England, but the famine of the year without a summer broke their spirit. Thousands of Yankees packed their wagons. This massive migration was nicknamed Ohio Fever. It wasn't caused by gold or greed. It was caused by a volcano 10,000 miles away. They fled the frozen rocks of Vermont for the deeper, more resilient soils of the Midwest. The very demographic makeup of the United States was reshaped by Tambora's ash. But the starvation followed them. In the streets of Philadelphia, the working poor began to riot over bread. In the South, the lack of sun led to crop failures that crippled the early cotton economy. Chapter 4. Darkness and the Birth of Monsters. While the American farmer was fighting for survival, the atmospheric gloom was having a strange effect on the human psyche. Over in Europe, the weather was just as dismal. On the shores of Lake Geneva, a group of young, eccentric writers were trapped indoors by the relentless freezing rain of 1816. Among them were Lord Byron and Mary Shelley. To pass the time in the oppressive candlelit darkness, they challenged each other to write the most terrifying story they could imagine. Inspired by the dead sky and the feeling of cosmic dread that permeated that year, Mary Shelley began to write Frankenstein. Simultaneously, Byron's physician John Polidori used the gloom to craft The Vampire, the first modern vampire story. The monsters that haunt our cinema today were born from the volcanic ash of 1816. The year without a summer didn't just change our borders, it changed our nightmares.